My guest is Val Ackerman. She is the commissioner of the Big East Conference. She's the founding president of the WNBA, first woman to serve as president of USA Basketball. She's a basketball Hall of Famer. Val, thanks so much for joining me on Sports Business Radio. I've wanted to have you on for a long time, and it's an honor to have you on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me.
All right, let's start off with your grandfather and your father were involved in athletics. How did that shape your career? Because you were a pretty elite high school and college basketball player yourself.
Well, the answer is, a lot. I think, we're often influenced by the activities or endeavors or professional avocations of our parents. And that was certainly the case with me. My dad was a high school athletics director who played a lot of sports when he was growing up, and successfully so. He was a great all-around athlete, and so he was really my hero, and someone I've tried to emulate in many ways. My grandfather, his father, was also an AD and had played sports and had coached and sort of done that whole, had sort of gone from, spot to spot. So that was sort of, made a big impression on me also. I thought at one point I'd be an AD also, and I've never got to be in that role, but being a commissioner has been pretty close in many respects. And I do credit them for, inspiring in me my interest in working in sports as a career.
Let's go back to the late 1980s, early 90s. You're working in the NBA league office in New York with our late great friend David Stern, who was the commissioner at the time. Rick Welts was also in the league office. Some really amazing sports executives came out of that time and that office. You were a staff attorney. What was that like? What was the period of time like? What did you learn from working there at that time?
Well, I'm very, fortunate because I had a chance to work at the NBA for 16 years. I started out when David was in his fourth year as commissioner, and my journey took me to both the men's side of basketball, including as his chief of staff, and then later as the first president of the WNBA, which really anybody who cares about that league should credit David for making that league a go. And I learned so much from working at David's side. He was a brilliant guy. You know him, Brian, as you said. Brilliant guy, could sort of like look around corners, if you will, and really, sort of understand what was coming next in the sports world, whether it was international or technology or the importance of women to the game of basketball. He just sort of got that. And the league that he built was really very nimble in the early years. So we were just sort of very entrepreneurial, and most everything was a go and give it a try. And the bureaucracy that you see among many sports organizations was absent in the early years that I was at the NBA, which made it really fun. And so I came up as a lawyer to begin with, started out as a staff attorney, was hired by Gary Bettman, who was then the general counsel of the NBA, now, of course, the commissioner of the NHL. So I started out in the legal department, and then I moved over to the commissioner's office, and then eventually landed with the WNBA. So to be able to learn from people like Russ Granick, deputy commissioner, Rick Welts, who you mentioned, chief marketing officer at that time, so many others, I can't list them all, it made for very robust formative years for me, working in pro sports. And a lot of what I do today, frankly, sort of harkens me back to what I learned from David, Rick, Russ, and others when I was on the job many years ago at the league.
So it's interesting to me, you were an attorney, David was an attorney, Adam Silver was an attorney, Gary Bettman was an attorney. What is it about being an attorney that helps be a commissioner as well?
It does help. And while I haven't practiced like law in a long time, it's still very handy when I have to think about an issue or try to tackle a problem. I think some of it is, there's risk There's legal risk in a number of the areas that one sort of finds oneself when you're operating in the sports environment. So to have a handle on sort of how to ask the right questions about risk assessment, in my case, I think for other lawyers in this business, sort of stems back to that legal training. Precedents matter. So, a good example might be a disciplinary matter. It's really helpful to be able to say, okay, we have this situation where we might have to impose a discipline, a penalty, or a sanction. Have we ever had this before? And if so, what did we do then? Because you have to, prove that you're fair. If you have a similar fact set, you want to handle it if you can in the same way. So there's no sense of unfairness in terms of how you meted out a punishment, for example. So precedents really go at the core of, legal training. And then the last piece I'd say is when you go to law school, there's a work ethic involved with getting through law school in one piece. And so it's just grinding. You have to be ready for every exam. You have to be ready, frankly, for every class in case you get called on by the professor. You don't want to embarrass yourself. It's a Socratic method, of course. And so you really get into this mindset of preparation and sometimes over preparation for a meeting or for some situation that you're in. And so, that's, a lot of how I've sort of built my work, my way of doing things is just being really ready for as much as I can, as much as time will permit. And I think that, again, that level of preparation and that mindset of being prepared, again, dates back to my days as a law student.
Yeah, that's great insight. The NBA has offices all over the world now. When you were working there, how many people were in the league office?
Well, when I started, there were under 100. I think I was
Wow.
employee number 98. Oh, yeah. That was in 1988, 34 years ago. And then David doubled the company the next year and doubled it again the year after. So he grew it pretty quickly to 500, as I remember. And then it's grown since then, added international offices. But it was really a very special time to be at the league when it was under 100. Because we were on a floor and a half. David would walk the halls, put his head into your office, say, "What are you working on?" He was sort of like a micromanager. So he wanted to know what everybody else was doing. And you're like, go be the CEO, go back to your office and be strategic and let us do our jobs. But, it was really a fun time. And the league, as I said, grew quickly, and the business took off with the first Dream Team, for example, and what that meant for the NBA's international growth. And then, of course, technology endeavors and the start of the WNBA were also very, very exciting, to be a part of. And so I was very fortunate to be on the ground floor of a lot of that.
So walk us through that conversation when David approaches you, I'm assuming, and says, "Hey, Val, we need you to lead this operation, the WNBA. We're starting a women's basketball league." How does that conversation take place, and how does that get off the ground?
Well, really, it didn't happen that abruptly, Brian. It wasn't sort of dropped out of the sky. There was a run up to the launch of the league. We I'll pick up on my comment about USA Basketball. To take a long history lesson and shrink it. The NBA was very involved in the first Dream Team, if you will. The first time that NBA players played in the Olympics in Barcelona was in 1992. And the NBA, because of that decision by FIBA, the International Federation, the NBA had to work very closely with USA Basketball with all the details that went into fielding that team, not just operationally, but commercially, and dealing with the US Olympic Committee and FIBA and other entities. And so we had this foundation of working with USA Basketball on the men's side that led to supporting USA Basketball on the women's side in advance of the 96 Olympics in Atlanta. For that Olympics, USA Basketball, with the NBA's support, put together a team of players that traveled for 10 months before the games and trained and toured. And that really was our way at the NBA of testing the waters to determine if there was interest in the highest levels of women's basketball that we could parlay into a league. And I was very involved in that effort, in that tour of that team. ESPN actually did a documentary on that team called Dream On. 3-part documentary that aired last June in connection with some Title IX films that ESPN had produced. So I recommend strongly to your listeners and viewers, check that out. It was really a very interesting story of how we brought that team together and what their journey was over that 10, 12-month period. So anyway, we were sort of in the women's basketball business through that team in 95, 96, and I was spearheading that for the league. And so as that team was unfolding, we were in the back room sort of quietly putting together a business plan for a WNBA that would launch the following summer in 97. And I was very involved in that as well. So the answer to your question is, when David and Russ got around to asking me, hey, would you be interested? I think with all modesty, I was sort of the natural because I'd been working on the national team endeavor. I was a, women's basketball person of sorts because of my playing career. And so it wasn't a surprise that they asked me, but it was an honor, a tremendous honor that they asked me to do it. And I had to confer with my husband, Charlie. We had young children at that time. It was clear it was going to be a lot of work. My husband was amazing and said, I'm supportive, which made it happen. And so that was it. And the rest, I guess you could say, sort of became history here as we then took off and did the planning, and, the league became a reality, as I said, in the summer of 97.
When you look back all these years later and see what the WNBA has become, I would imagine you have a great amount of pride knowing that, again, you were part of the early days.
No question. I mean, it's sometimes strange, to be honest, because I was so deeply involved in the league, in its formative years, its infancy. And now I think it's past being a teenager. It's 26, 27 years later. So it's more advanced in terms of its longevity and what it's accomplished. And I've been gone a while. So I'm more of very much an observer at this point. But I do have very, very vivid memories, very strong emotional and vivid memories of those early years and what it took to get the league off the ground, and what frankly, how hard it was to deal with the naysayers at that time, because people were not ready. We were ahead of our time, I think, in some ways. So we had to deal with this notion that people just really weren't ready for a women's pro basketball league in the ways they are now. And you're seeing that in the embrace of other sports now, and in the embrace of the WNBA now, in ways that weren't possible a generation ago. But it is great to see the traction, and the players are remarkable. And, I'm the biggest cheerleader here. I hope they continue to build and, become what the NBA became on the men's side. That would be the ultimate goal. I hope that happens.
It feels like we've come a long way with women's sports. You see the growth of the WNBA, the growth of the NWSL, but there's still a long way to go. There's, not nearly as much investment in women's sports as there is in men's sports. What needs to happen for women's sports to continue to grow in this country?
Well, I think, I define the connection between women's sports in a couple of ways, and they all have a pathway, I think, to do more, do better. One is participation, which Title IX opened the doors on that now 50 years ago. And it's night and day how many more women and girls play sports, including at the high school and collegiate levels, thanks to Title IX. And, I hope, for me, growing up as a young girl in New Jersey in the 60s, opportunities to play sports weren't that plentiful. And now they are for young girls. So that to me is progress. But can we make it more plentiful? Sure. Can we do more at the high school and collegiate level? I'm sure we can. So for me, that's just competent leadership, the force of federal law, resource deployment thoughtfully and, competently. We'll get there. That's participation. Number two is women as fans. I mean, we're seeing now every major sports organization has to recognize the importance of women in its fan demographic. And so, we're seeing more efforts, made around building that. I think for women's sports at the elite level, building the fan base is critically important. That's how those sports are going to grow revenues, by getting more fans who are dipping into their wallets to buy tickets, who are watching games on TV, which drives up viewership, and that gets advertisers interested, and that gets networks interested, and that's where the money comes from at the end of the day. So building fan support, women fans and fan support generally for women's sports, I think is important. And then, the last two pieces for me are building these pro leagues, WNBA, NWSL, maybe someday there'll be a WNHL, women's pro volleyball, you name it. We're more in the infant stages, adolescent stages with the women's pro leagues than we see on the men's side, where the leagues are very mature. So building those elite platforms, Olympics, high end of college sports, et cetera, is a to-do. And then last but not least, and this, really resonates with me, is women as leaders. I mean, when I was coming up, there were no women that I had to look up to working at the NBA. I mean, I had great mentors in David and Russ and Rick and others, but I didn't have like female role models who were executives. And that was really, when I was bringing when I had my kids, when I was at the league, I was really on a solitary journey. There was nobody I could say, hey, how do I do this job and have children at home? I had to figure that out on my own. So now you've got more women who are working mothers like myself. But we need more women generally to lead sports organizations. And it'd be great if, former athletes become leaders, as I did, because we understand the ins and outs, ways that others might not. So that piece, the leadership piece, and getting it to happen not only domestically, but globally, I think is on my list of to-dos. And it just, it's going to be the passage of time. It's going to be good leadership to, accelerate these, these developments, keep them going. I think it's a combination of factors, but I'm optimistic. I think we made a lot of progress. We have work to do, but we're going to get to where we need to get to.
How does it feel to you to be a mentor to so many? Like you said, when you were in that league office, there weren't other women in the office, and knowing that you could kind of look to as a mentor, you've been that for so many people. How does that feel to you?
It's important to me. I mean, I do it because I feel like I need to do it. I mean, because just as you said, I didn't have that. I didn't have, someone to call, or particularly on these, these working mother, challenges. Or, sort of, okay, you're a woman working in a predominantly male profession. Like, how do you do that? How do you, what are some tips on how to be effective in that environment? I mean, I just had to figure it out on my own for the most part. So I do feel a responsibility to help any young woman or colleague who calls me, and many do, to say, how do I get into the business? What does it take to be successful? Can you give me some guidance on sort of, how to get in the door, how to advance? I mean, I never say no when I get these inquiries. And again, because I didn't have it, I feel doubly responsible to make sure that the women who are going to take my place at some point, we're all links in a chain, and we all want to work a good shift while we're at it. So at some point, somebody's going to take over for me, and I would like them to be, as equipped as I have become, and can take it to the next level. That's my dream.
That's great. All right, let's talk about the Big East Conference. You're the commissioner. You've been there since 2013. When I was growing up, it was Pat Ewing, it was Chris Mullin, it was Ed Pinckney. I remember the early days of the Big East, and I've always looked at the conference as such a fan from afar. There have been lots of changes over your reign, and certainly since I was a kid. But, where's the conference right now? I know, basketball is the revenue driver. There is no more football. How's the conference doing? How's the health of the conference?
It's good. It's really good. I'm with you. I was a fan too of the old Big East. And I remember when the old Big East was breaking up 12 years ago, after a bunch of defections in the preceding half a dozen years. I was actually teaching a sports management class at Columbia University, and we were using the breakup of the old Big East as a case study in my class.
Wow.
So it was very ironic when they finally did it. They broke away, and then had to find a commissioner that I was approached about that. It was just, it was incredible sort of sequence of events, those memorable months. But, we are now, thanks for the plug, giving me the chance to make the plug. We're now 10 years into what I call the new Big East. We sponsor 22 sports. Men's and women's basketball are our lead. We don't sponsor football, although we have a few schools that play football. We don't manage it for them. But, we're based here in New York City, as you can see from my backdrop here, from early days at Providence, in Providence, Rhode Island. And we are, wholly committed to our athletes, the academic development of them. Our schools call it the development of the whole person. We do a lot of activities to bring together the common missions of our schools outside of athletics. So we do work in mental health. We do work in diversity, equity, inclusion. We did our part with sort of Title IX awareness last year. And so I think the conference right now it's stable. It's in a very good position in terms of how relevant we are nationally, in terms of our competitive prospects. We have very high graduation rates, second only to the Ivy League and the Patriot League in the Big East. And we're trying to be leader-like because college sports right now is going through an interesting time period. There's lots of challenges in front of the space. And we're trying very hard to do our part to make sure that college sports stay strong, as writ large, stay strong and healthy in the years to come, because we're in the people development business. That was me. I went to college on a basketball scholarship. I mean, I'm the person I am today because I was an athlete at my school. So many of us went through that experience, believe in it. And so we want to make sure that college sports stays healthy and strong for the many athletes especially for the ones whose sports don't generate any revenue. Because I think given some of the changes that may be underfoot with college sports, those athletes could be vulnerable in the future because of how the reality of the economics in college sports. But it's been very exciting, and Fox Sports has been a terrific television partner for us. I want to give them a lot of credit for bringing us to this point over 10 years. And I think the future of the conference remains very bright.
We've seen NIL in the last year or so. You talk about changes afoot. What are some of those changes that you see coming?
Well, it remains to be seen, Brian, where we go now a year and a half into NIL. Just to sort of remind everybody, NIL went live July of 21. There were sort of pressures from many states on the NCAA's rules at that time, which did not allow for players to enter into endorsement deals that allowed them to basically sell their name, image, and likeness rights to companies in exchange for services. That wasn't allowed. It is now. The challenge, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's good NIL. The good part of NIL is that these opportunities exist, that it's not just the high profile men's basketball and football players, it's athletes in women's sports and Olympic sports that have the ability to make some money. And it's educational, because to do these endeavors, you got to be a little bit of a business person, strike the right deal, and to be thoughtful about, how to manage your time, because you got to go to class and play your sport still to stay eligible. Got to go to class. So, there's been a learning experience, I think, for these endeavors. It's been a positive. The challenging part of NIL right now is there is no single standard in terms of how it's managed. Many states have laws that vary from state to state that create some confusion. These endeavors are not supposed to be used as basically bribes to go to a particular school. They're not supposed to be for nothing. You have to do real work to get the NIL money. It can't just be because you're the starting point guard on the basketball team. That's what we call pay for play. So sorting out, what I would call legitimate NIL from fraudulent NIL has been a work in progress for, NCAA schools. And I don't know, where that's headed. I mean, it has to get sorted out. Whether Congress becomes involved in sorting it out remains to be seen. Some think that would be necessary to do the sorting. But, I don't have the crystal ball on where we're going to be in a year or two. But again, I think that's the balance right now, is the good part of NIL and what it's done for income and education versus the more challenging compliance side of NIL that tries, is intended to keep it a fair playing field and prevent undue harm to the athletes because of, undue influences in the process who might not have their best interests at heart. How to manage those two areas.
Just a couple minutes left. I think at some point you went to UCLA. So I've got to ask you, USC, UCLA, they moved to the Big Ten. I'm a West Coaster. So I look at that and go, wait a minute, this is totally out of the norm from what I grew up with. Are we going to see more seismic shifts in the college landscape ahead where people are going to the conferences that offer the most amount of money?
Possibly. I mean, that's sort of what's happening now, if you stop to think about it. And that's the right that every school has, frankly, to figure out what setup is the best in the best interests of that school long term. And some of that may be competitive, some of it may be based on values and geography, and some of it, frankly, may be financial. It may just flat out be for the money. And so the answer to your question is yes. I don't have the crystal ball here, and I don't have inside information on any movements that I've heard about that are looming. But I do think that it's very possible that you could see other changes in configurations and with realignment. I will note my observation is a lot of it is football driven. That's really the driving force, the engine on some of these moves, because if you stop to think about the travel that might be involved, if a school is moving to a conference that's further away geographically, football's one thing. If you're playing once a week and half the time you're at home, a cross-country trip may be manageable and is manageable. But if you're the volleyball team traveling 2 or 3 times a week, then long distances really are a factor. And in my opinion, really need to be thought through thoroughly by the participating schools.
Yeah.
Because that's you've got student athlete interest, missed class time, everything, going on at that point, plus cost.
Right.
That gets real expensive real fast. So yes, I think more could happen. And, for every last thing I'll say is for every conference commission, we're all just keeping our eye on it. I mean, we're not doing our jobs if we're not monitoring these changes, trying to, think through what are the nuances there, and importantly, what it would mean for our group of schools.
Val Ackerman, the commissioner of the Big East Conference. I feel like we could talk for hours. You are a wealth of history and information, and I just appreciate you making the time to join me on Sports Business Radio. Continued success to you.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Happy New Year to you, and look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
Thanks, Val. Take care.